We are back in the tournament war room this week where I explained to you what I saw over the course of the tournament weekend as a caster that surprised me, what performed well, and some slight adaptations to the meta decks that you might not be aware of if you haven't been paying a very close eye on the tournament scene. Now, before I get into it, you may be wondering why this is a day late. That's because the LBR has returned. That is a Brazilian Legends of Runeterra tournament league, and every Monday and Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, myself and Shit Just Works will be bringing you an English broadcast of that for the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, come on, check it out, and watch me cast some Legends of Runeterra. This is going to be pretty painless. I'm mainly looking to highlight new decks as well as some changes to other existing decks in the format. For example, Vile Feast has once again been added back into Go Hard pretty popularly across the board. Started to see this more and more over the course of the weekend as it evolved in a lot yesterday on Monday in the first day of the LBR. And this is really just to help deal with Zoes and things like that. But, you know, just watch out. Keep that in mind. There is some fast speed interaction in the Go Hards most likely to pop your Bastions and things of that nature. Speaking of changes to existing decks, the Invoke deck, the Zoe Diana, has more or less been solved at this point. The one thing that I see players constantly changing between, if you'll notice these numbers up here, this is a 42 card deck, because players are usually on either 2 copies of Solari's Shieldbearer or 2 copies of Sunburst, generally not seeing both of them in the same deck, but this is the main difference that I've seen between a lot of the lists, and Moonlit Affliction is a pretty new addition to the deck that really everybody has taken to like a fish to water. You are seeing this in so many lists alongside Hush, and it makes sense. When you think about old Hush, the one that people love to complain about, it was 3 mana and created fleeting copies in hand. So that was 1 card, 6 mana to silence 2 units. And generally, you weren't going for 3 or 4 silences unless you were an Ezreal or a deck similar to that that really cared about targeting like Lux. Instead, Moonlight Affliction going to do the same thing, but also really great at being able to push through Zoes and, you know, just doing a lot for the deck because there isn't a lot of removal. So the silences can help a lot. This is something that I think is here to stay. In terms of slightly bigger changes to existing archetypes, Ezreal is out and Swain is actually back in. Draven seems to have paired up with the Lord High Commander of Noxus in order to start to take over the role of the P&Z Noxus champion. Players just not really happy with the way that the Ezreal had actually played out, calculating the amount of damage that he did over the course of a game just wasn't really enough for them, and because Captain Farron on 8 felt so pivotal, we figured, hey, why not add more 8 drops to the deck? And now, of course, we have Leviathan, Swain's flagship ship, that's really going to help stabilize you into the late game, and you don't really sacrifice any of that early game power. Ezreal was having difficulties getting through anyway because of Zoes and Zap Spray Fins and things of that nature. He just wasn't really doing what the deck needed him to do, and I do really like the Swain adaptation, especially with something like Ballistic Bot, having that consistent pressure to stun your opponent's units at the start of your round. I really just think that this is the future of Draven, Piltover, and Zon for the time being, at least in a mid-range to control capacity. Obviously, discard aggro still exists, but it's not super popular. I think that this is going to be the deck that you're looking forward to. I wouldn't expect Draven Ezreal to more or less completely fall off in the coming weeks. Some players have been unable to decide between Zoe Lee Sin and Karma Lee Sin and decided to just cut out the middleman, pair the girls together, and thus we get Zoe Karma. This deck has made a little bit of a splash into the tournament scene, although I'm not sure how its longevity is going to be. Generally, Karma decks aren't sticking around super long unless they're oppressive. They tend to fall back into the shadows and then really only be played by diehard fans. But this is something that I did want to make players aware of because it is a complicated deck. It is a very high skill floor and an even higher skill ceiling. Something like Heimerdinger, which had a very high ceiling as well, had a pretty low floor due to some of the games where you would just play the Heimerdinger on 5, your opponent wouldn't kill it, and you would overrun them with turrets. You're not getting any such luxuries in a deck like this. This is a deck that is going to test you, but with great power comes great responsibility and great reward. You just have to put your mind to it and grind it out. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a big mainstay, and with the Pack Your Bags nerf, it's even harder to say as the playability and usefulness of Nopify is going to continue to decrease from here on out after that nerf today. But I did want to make you aware that this deck exists because I think it is still in that trial period where you're going to see it for the next couple of weeks still before it does retreat back into the shadows with Spooky Karma. Now, Trundle Auralian Soul Field Rush isn't necessarily a new deck, but it's been so long since we saw it in the mainstream that I figured I'd give you a good reminder of what it looks like. You know, same Freljord cards as Field of Rush, but we have Infinite Mind Splitter and Auralian Soul. A couple copies of Dragon's Clutch is not uncommon in order to get those easier turns and curves played out, you know, just a little bit of draw power in a deck like this so that you can find those champions a little bit easier in your late game bombs, things like that. And overall, obviously going to be a very powerful Aurelion Soul deck, probably one of the easier easier ones to level him, as you only need one additional card. Maybe sometimes all you need is an attack with the leveled up Trundle off of the Feel the Rush that they both came out of, and you will level the A-Soul. But yeah, this deck's been making a splash again, a little bit of a return. Not really sure if it's going to be here to stay, but I do want to make you aware because I have seen more than a couple of players start to top events with this over the last couple of days, even going into, Monday and Tuesday, and I think that we will continue to see this over the course of the next weekend. Feel the Rush should be falling off a little bit with the nerf to Pack Your Bags. I think that it was mainly staying around as a go hard counter, but only time will tell. And finally, in terms of newer decks that you should be watching out for, we have Teemo Sejuani. A couple of top players have decided that this is it. This is the deck, though they seem to be agreeing that they are still very far from the perfect list. I know that Starlit Seer is something that What Am I had mentioned as saying it was just rummage fodder. He feels like it should be cut from the deck, but a lot of these cards should be staying the same. There's a lot of synergies within this deck. Obviously, Ballistic Bot and Peddler. Starlit Seer seemed like a natural fit, but was apparently a bait, and I am curious to see how this works out. With Go Hard potentially getting out of the meta, Teemo should have a much easier time getting through, or at the very least trading with your opponent Zoe's, which I think is going to work out better for the Teemo players. Their opponent is not getting the advantage that they had kind of hoped to. Obviously, you don't need Teemo to win the game. You do still have a couple of other options, but it's always nice to see what was once considered one of the memeiest decks in the game become an actual contender for some tournament lineups, and I am really curious to see how this one plays out, but I would expect to see more of this, and if this is your kind of jam, go ahead and experiment with it. Go hog wild. You have the permission of the larger Legends of Runeterra community to, say that, yeah, this is competitive, you can play this, and we're not going to laugh at you. And before I let you go, I did want to touch on 3 decks that are known quantities. I'm not going to put the lists on screen because I'm confident that you have an idea of what these decks look like, but Tom Raka, Mist Wraiths, and Scouts have all spiked in popularity from the last couple of weeks going into this last weekend, so just something to be aware of. I mean, that's the point of War Room, right? I'm here to make you aware of things and how the meta is playing out from the eyes of an observer. So yeah, that's really it for War Room. I will see you guys again on Friday, or if you want to check me out tonight and relatively soon, the LBR, and once again every Monday and Tuesday, me and Shit Just Works will be on his Twitch channel doing that for the foreseeable future in the coming weeks, and got a lot more tournaments coming at you for the remainder of January, but I will see you all again on Tournament Tactician. So in the meantime, my name is Boulevard. As always, good luck in your tournaments.